Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Brazil, welcome to Manaus, welcome to the pre-COP30 conference, a scientific call for COP30, Science Academies United for Climate Action. This meeting is organized by the Brazilian Academy of Sciences in partnership with the Inter-American Network of Academies of Sciences, ANAS, and with the generous support of FINEP, that's the Funding Authority for Studies and Projects, of INPA, the National Institute for Amazonian Research, and the Inter-Academy Partnership, IAP. I kindly invite you to switch off your mobile phones or place them in silence mode. And without further delay, it's my great honor to invite Professor Helena Nader, President of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, to open the meeting and deliver her opening remarks.
Thank you, Marcos. Oops. Eu vou pegar na mão. Now it's better. Thank you, Marcos. Distinguished authorities, excellencies, representatives of governments and international organizations, dear colleagues from the academies of science of all continents, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to welcome you here in Manaus, in the heart of the Amazon, for this historic gathering of science academies united for climate action. We meet at a defining moment. The climate crisis is no longer a distant threat. It is reality that affects ecosystems, economies, and societies across the planet. The meeting is about climate change, its cause, its consequence, and above all, the urgent actions that science tells us are necessary. We are not neglecting this challenge. We are confronting it with knowledge, cooperation, and determination, besides resilience. We cannot forget that in 2015, 194 countries signed an agreement that was called the 23rd Agreement for the 17 Sustainable Goals. We have only 5 years to move forward, and we still have not reached the final goal. And do not forget that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals has as its primary focus humanity, One Health, and leave no one behind. We need to always remember that, because 194 countries signed it. Some are out recently, but 193 are still in the group. So, hosting this meeting in Brazil, and particularly in the Amazon, carries, in my opinion, profound symbolism. This region is not only a treasure of biodiversity, it is a living system that regulates rainfall, stores carbon, and sustains the cultural and material life of millions of people. The future of the Amazon is inseparable from the future of our planet. The meeting that begins today is more than academic exercise. It is a collective statement, a scientific call to place tropical forests, biodiversity, and science itself at the center of global climate decisions. As the world prepares for COP30 in Belém, we, the scientific community, come together to affirm and reaffirm that science is ready. The data, the technologies, and the pathways to a sustainable and actable future already exist. What we need now is political will and international cooperation to turn knowledge into action. This call unites more than 40 academies from all regions, from the Amazon to the Congo Basin, from Southeast Asia to the Pacific, from Africa to Europe and the Americas. Here, today, we have the presence of 26 countries, besides the presence of Inter-Academy Partnership, IAP, the Inter-American Network of Academies of Science, IANAS, the ACAL, which is the Latin American Science Academy, as well as to us, the World Academy of Science. So I think we represent science from the globe. And together, we bring evidence, experience, and a shared commitment to safeguard the planet's tropical forests as a global common good, essential for climate stability, biodiversity, and human well-being. The Brazilian Academy of Science is deeply proud to host this initiative and to stand alongside our partners in IANAS, Karen Stryer, and around the world. We believe that protecting the planet, not only the tropical forests, is not only an environmental necessity. It is a moral and a civilizational imperative. It is about justice, sustainability, and the right of future generations to a livable planet. We got that, at least me, 77 years ago. I was born and I was put into this planet, and it was a beautiful place. Why am I not living the same for the youth that are coming around? We have to bear that in mind. Nobody owns the planet. We all live in the planet. May this meeting strengthen bonds between science, society, and policy. May it inspire decisive outcomes at COP30, transforming evidence into action, promises into commitments, and commitments into lasting change. Let us make Manaus and Belém milestones of global responsibility, where the voice of science, grounded in cooperation and solidarity, helps guide humanity towards a safer, fair, and more sustainable future. And before closing, I would like to thank all the staff from the Brazilian Academy of Science who worked together to put this meeting in place. I want to thank INPA. Here we have the director, and we have also a former director, my good friend, Adalberto Val, who made it possible for us to be here again. And I'm kind of emotional because this means a lot for me. I have grandchildren. Some are getting old already, some are already married. But I have two little ones. One that's 6 years old, a little girl, and the other one is a little boy, 1.5-year-old. For them, I'm still trying to get to what the world needs. We need to really face the things that bring us together and not the opposite. We have lots in common. We don't need to be really good friends. We just need to be friends of the planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Elena. I now invite Professor Karen Stryer. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences and the co-chair of the Inter-American Network of Academies of Sciences.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Elena. Good evening, everybody. As Marcus said, I'm the co-president of the Inter-American Network of the Academies of Sciences. And it is really a pleasure to be here again because it was just a little over 2 years ago, early July 2023, when our group, met here with Elena as my co-chair, as well as the president of the Brazilian Academy. Thanks to Adalberto Val for coordinating that whole meeting for us again. We were standing here in the same room talking about a new initiative that we had just launched, the IANAS Amazon Initiative. And now 2 years and a few months later, here we are again in a much bigger forum to talk about what we can all do to contribute to a scientific basis for the COP30. The last time I stood on this stage, I pointed to a slide, and right on the window there was a monkey. And I screamed because I'm actually a primatologist. I've worked in Brazil for 43 years. Brazil, as you may already know, is a mega biodiversity country. It's got more than 20% of the world's primates, but it also has biodiversity of many other species of plants and animals. And so it gives me a special pleasure and scientific satisfaction that one of the main initiatives of the declaration that we will produce at this meeting includes biodiversity as a partner with climate change. And that for too long, these two very important and completely integrated concepts were treated by separate people in separate concepts with separate processes. And it's really nice that I think we'll have an opportunity to converge them more and to begin to think about these issues at a more integrated level. And the last thing I wanted to say is just that it's especially important to me, not just representing IANAS, but as a member of the US National Academy of Sciences, to be in a room with other science academies to talk about international collaboration. As you all know, things are changing rapidly in the US, and we American scientists need this kind of venue, this kind of opportunities to interact with our colleagues so that we can help improve the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I now invite Carlos Eduardo Matsumoto. He's the head of the Office of International Affairs of the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation.
Good afternoon to all of you. It is with a great honor that the Minister of Science, Technology, and Innovation of Brazil participates in this event, a scientific call for COP30. On behalf of the Minister of Science, Technology, and Innovation, Luciana Santos, I thank the Brazilian Academy of Sciences at the Inter-American Network of Academies of Sciences for the invitation and extend my warm greetings to all presidents and representatives of the sciences academies that join us for the next 3 days. Brazil is making all the necessary efforts to have a conference of the parties in which the social participation is key to implement the agreements that reached in the previous COPs. This means that the civil society, including indigenous and local communities, the private sector, and of course, the academia and traditional knowledge holders. In this sense, this event organized here in Manaus is of extreme importance. The results that will emanate from the next 2 days of discussion can be a unisonos and legitimate voice in defense of science to warn and bring the solutions to the negotiations that will start in 3 weeks from now in Belém. We are proud as ministry and as Brazilian government to support this initiative, to support this event through FINEP and INPA, the organizations from our ministry, and congratulate again ABC and IANAS for the initiative. We also congratulate some of the most important academies of science and the scientists that made the efforts to be here in Brazil to collaborate to this important action. It is truly symbolic that we are meeting here at the National Institute for Amazonian Research. INPA is responsible for developing and coordinating several scientific projects and experiments of the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation for the region. I would like to mention 2 of them, due to their relationship with climate change and international collaboration. The Ato Tower and the Amazon Face are large research infrastructures located in the heart of the Amazon forest that bring and will bring important scientific data to the most advanced climate science produced in the world. These experiments are possible because, in this case, Brazil, Germany, and the United Kingdom joined forces to put forward such endeavor. Dear participants, we are living in turbulent times, with conflicts and geopolitical tensions in several parts of the world, and increasing protectionism, which sometimes can prioritize competition and security issues rather than cooperation. At the same time, the global challenge that we face and that can undermine our planet and our existence itself are growing. The Earth is getting warming, biodiversity is diminishing, people are still facing hunger, and the next health emergency will come sooner or later. We need more than ever partnerships in science to solve our common problems. We need more multilateralism and collaboration, not less. That's why we should stay firm, together, and optimistic in initiatives like this. Brazil reaffirms its long-standing commitment to promoting research international collaboration in order to drive development, social well-being, economic growth, inclusion, and environmental and climate sustainability. Our country also remains fully committed to reducing asymmetries and inequalities in access to and production of science. Thank you again for the invitation, and wish to 2 productive days of work. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Tainara Espíndola Pereira, who's the coordinator of the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change connected to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change of Brazil.
Hello, good evening everyone. It's a great honor to be here today. I'd like to greet all of you that are here today and thank the Brazilian Academy of Science, the Inter-American Network of Academies of Science for the invitation to participate in this important event. I also extend greetings on behalf of the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change of Brazil, Ms. Marina Silva, who unfortunately couldn't be here today to intense preparation for COP30. My name is Tainara Espíndola Pereira. I work at the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. And I'm deeply honored to take part in this meeting, which brings together outside science and institutions committed to advancing science knowledge and promoting effective climate action. The topics to be discussed here, such as climate change adaptation, forest and biodiversity conservation, climate justice, the social impacts of the climate crisis, and international scientific cooperation are at the heart of the Brazilian government's current climate agenda. At the Ministry, we constantly emphasize that effective public policies must be based on solid science evidence. The principle has guided the development of Brazil's climate plan, that we call Plano Clima, the federal government's long-term strategy to address climate change, which was developed within the scope of the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change. The plan is in its final stage of preparation, and we hope to launch it by COP30. Recently, we made a significant step forward by reformulating the governance of the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change. We expanded participation and launched the Scientific Advisory Chamber, with the goal of bringing the government closer to the scientific community. This chamber will serve as a key bridge between the knowledge produced by academia and the formulation of evidence-based public climate policies. We expect this initiative to provide concrete contributions to the development and implementation of climate policies in Brazil, particularly in terms of monitoring and evaluation of these policies, allowing us to measure the country's climate action progress based on the best available science. This will also help us assess whether we are on track to meet our NDCs and, if it's necessary, make adjustments on the road. Forest and biodiversity conservation, another central topic of this event, is also an absolute priority for Brazilian governments. We recognize that there is no solution to the climate crisis without the protection of our biomes. For this reason, it is especially symbolic to be here today in the heart of Amazon, in one of the most beautiful places that I ever have been. I can't stop to stare in the windows. And reaffirming our commitment to the protection of these ecosystems and to the traditional people and communities who have safeguarded them for generations. I do also like to highlight that international scientific cooperation is a fundamental pillar for advancing global solutions. Science knows no border, and only through dialogue and cooperation between countries and institutions will be able to accelerate the necessary transformation. For that, I once again congratulate the organizers on this initiative. So, besides being a public servant, I also hope to be a climate scientist like you are. Now I'm science in training. I finished my PhD in bioenergy. So today I not only have the mission of represent the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, but also the privilege of engaging with science that I deeply admire and think has a crucial role on construction this climate action. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I wish you have a successful and inspiring event.
Thank you. Let me now invite Dalila Andrade Oliveira, who's the Director of Institutional and International Cooperation and Innovation of the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development of Brazil, our CNPq.
Good afternoon or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My greetings for all the authorities present. I would like to congratulate Professor Helena Nader, President of the Brazilian Academy of Science, for organizing this important event, and thank her for inviting the CNPq, the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development, to participate in this meeting, this important meeting. The current situation has challenged us to present concrete proposals to address issues crucial to the survival of the planet. As the oldest research funding agency in Brazil, the CNPq has contributed to the development of knowledge in all areas, providing special support for research on climate change, biodiversity, sustainability, renewable energy, water resource, food, among other topics of great relevance to the planet and its populations, including with a view to greater social justice. As everyone knows, the CNPq, together with the MCTI, has currently had a very committed agenda to restore the levels of support for scientific research in Brazil, lost due to years of denialism in many areas, but especially regarding the environment. Finally, I'd like to say that it's a pleasure for us to be here today, and I hope we have an excellent event. Thank you very much.
I now invite Marilene Correia da Silva, who's a member of the board of the Brazilian Society for the Advancement of Science, our SBPC.
Boa noite. Sem script e falando em português. Eu queria cumprimentar.
I first would like to greet President of the Brazilian Academy of Science, and also for partner in the Inter-American Society of Science, to say 3 important points on behalf of the presidency of SBPC, Dr. Francilene Garcia, that couldn't be here. The first is that there's a tradition, the SBPC and ABC, to strive for science and democracy in Brazil. This is the first point. Secondly, that the ideas they converge about the role of science in this moment in Brazil, in this moment of the world, in this moment in the COP30, where we will give our best. And at the end, we believe that Brazil has all the possibilities of sustainable development side by side with science. Without science, we're not going far. Thank you very much. Good evening.
I now invite Tanara Lauschner, and she's the rector of the Federal University of Amazonas here in Manaus, and she's also representing the National Association of Directors of Federal Higher Education Institutions, ANGIFES.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here representing the Federal University of Amazonas and on behalf of the National Association of Directors of Federal Higher Education Institutions, ANGIFES, to participate in the opening of this highly relevant and timely event. First, I would like to greet the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, represented by its president, Professor Helena Nador, and greet Professor Henrique Pereira, our host here in IMPA. My friends, Matsumoto and from MCTI and Dalila of CNPq, and all the organizers for the initiative of promoting this meeting, which anticipates the scientific debate leading up to COP30, to be held for the first time in the Amazon in Belém do Pará next year. I also extend my greetings to the other science academies represented here, to the researchers, institutional and governmental leaders, and to all those who are devoted in different ways to the fight against the climate crisis. Being here in Manaus, my city, carries profound meaning. This territory, which is at once a symbol of the planet's natural wealth and its environment vulnerability, call us to responsibility. The federal universities of the Amazon know this reality well. We are institutions that produce science in direct dialogue with forest peoples, riverine communities, and the concrete challenges of conservation and sustainable development. On behalf of ANDIFES and the Brazilian federal universities, I would like to express our gratitude for the invitation and reaffirm that we are fully committed to the climate agenda. We have been closely following the discussions leading up to COP30 and are mobilized to contribute actively through scientific knowledge, innovation, professional education, and the construction of solutions based on evidence and social justice. The network of federal universities is a true asset of Brazil. It comprises 69 federal universities and 2 federal centers of technological education present in every region of the country, many of them located in strategic biomes such as the Amazon, the Cerrado, the Pantanal, and the semi-arid region. This unique territorial presence enables our universities to work in an integrated and collaborative manner, producing data analysis and public policies that can support Brazil in fulfilling its international commitments on climate change mitigation and adaptation. The science produced at Brazilian University is, above all, a science committed to life, to the preservation of biodiversity, the reduction of inequalities, and the future of the next generations. That is why this event is so important. It reinforces that our response to the climate crisis must be guided by science, but also by cooperation. Cooperation among countries, among institutions, and among different fields of knowledge. None of us will overcome this challenge alone. May this meeting generate concrete contribution to COP30 and strengthen the role of the scientific community in shaping global policies to face the climate emergency. On behalf of ANDIFES, I reaffirm our commitment to move forward together, supporting initiatives like these and making the federal universities available to collaborate in the formulation and implementation of the actions that Brazil and the world so urgently need. Thank you very much.
I now invite Flávio Greenspan, who's the head of the Innovation and Sustainable Development Committee of the Brazilian National Academy of Engineering.
Good afternoon to all of you. I would like to start thanking Professor Helena Nada for inviting us, the National Academy of Engineering, to be part of this wonderful event. And I would like to, since we're not part of a government directly, we are a group of engineers. Here I have one of our representatives, Professor Prata, and we work with solutions. And one of the areas that we are very much aware of the need of solutions to the climate changes. We've been seeing a situation already in advanced stage. For example, in Belém, you have almost 2 degrees centigrades of increased temperature, average temperature. 50 occasions they had a situation of huge rains that caused floods in the city. So as Academy of Engineers, we are worried about the situation that the climate changes are causing to the population and to the cities. And we've been working on that. For example, we signed an agreement last month between the Brazilian Academy of Science, National Academy of Medicine, and National Academy of Engineering to work together on issues that affect our population. And based on this, I do believe that I'm here to work with Professor Helena Nader in order to find solutions. We, in our academy, we're not only worried about mitigation of the climate. We have already situations that the change in temperature is already causing significant effect in the society. And 2 basic situations we are confronting today. One is dry weather and the consequence on production of food, consequences on health. And the other is floods, and the situation that is a consequence in a lot of cities around the world. So our academy is worried about developing solutions that could help the society. That is our role. And I do believe that we can work together between the Brazilian Academy of Science and with the National Academy of Engineering. Last month we had our one event that we discussed about the key issues on Brazil. And some of them relate to this meeting. And we created challenges for the students of all the universities in Brazil in 6 areas. One area was energy, sustainable development, agriculture, health, intelligent cities, and water. And just for a coincidence, 2 of those challenges were related to this region. One by the engineers from the Military Institute of Engineering of Rio that worked on developing solutions with green hydrogen. That is they affect directly the need of this region for energy. They don't have energy in most of the area here. So they are creating solutions for the situation that exists in this region. And the other one was in relation to the floods in Belém. There was one student from the University of Amazon that presented a solution based on sponges, urban sponges, to absorb the water from the floods. So this is just 2 examples of possibilities that we have been working. And today, during my 4-hour flight from São Paulo, I looked into other possible solutions that I could present to you. And I came into one interesting fact. Bill Gates he created a fund He doesn't depend on funding from the government. He created a fund from the private sector. And he is stimulating solutions for the climate. He has 100 startups being funded. Very probably in most of the regions, those startups could present solutions that could help all of you. So I invite you to look into this and eventually to find already solutions that could be introduced in your countries and help to alleviate the burden that the society is having today. So I thank you very much once again for Professor Nadia's invitation, and I congratulate all of you for this meeting. Thank you.
I would now like to invite our local host, Henrique Pereira, who's the director of the National Institutes for Research of the Amazon, our INPA.
Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's with great honor and joy that I welcome you on behalf of the Instituto Nacional de Pesquisas da Amazônia, INPA, to this important gathering, a scientific call for COP30, Science Academies United for Climate Action. Allow me to begin by extending my respectful greetings to Professor Helena Bonciani Nader, President of the Brazilian Academy of Science, and to the representatives of the Inter-American Network of Academies of Sciences, IANAS, whose joint initiative made this event possible. I would also like to warmly welcome all colleagues representing national and international academies of sciences, researchers, and policymakers who have traveled to Manaus to take part in this dialogue. In particular, I am delighted to greet my dear friend, Professor Cristina Branquinho, representing the Academy of Science of Portugal. She will join us tomorrow, and our community of Portuguese-speaking countries for environmental studies. And my colleague, Professor Jérôme Chave, with whom I share the honor of serving on the Binational Council of the Franco-Brazilian Center for Amazonian Biodiversity. Your presence here today symbolizes the scientific bridges that unite continents for the defense of our shared planet. Dear friends, hosting this event here at INPA is profoundly symbolic. For 70 years, our institution has stood at the forefront of research of Amazonian ecosystems, biodiversity, and climate, linking fundamental science to the well-being of the people of the forest. Today, as the world prepares for COP30 in Belém, this meeting reminds us that science must remain the fountain and the foundation for climate diplomacy and decision-making. From the heart of the Amazon, we send a clear message. Only through collaboration among nations, disciplines, and cultures, we can ensure a sustainable future for all of us. The discussions of the next days on biodiversity, knowledge, and justice, transitions to a sustainable climate future, and governance are essential to shape the scientific statement that will be delivered to COP30. It's our shared responsibility to make this statement not just a document, but a call to action guided by evidence, ethics, and equity. On behalf of INPA and its communities of researchers, students, staff, assessors, non-human beings, the forest, I wish you all an inspiring and productive meeting. May these conversations in Manaus at Bosque da Ciência in INPA strengthen our collective commitment to the Amazon and to the planet. Thank you very much, and once again, welcome to Impact.
Okay, well, we're almost over. We now have a very short video message from Ambassador André Correia do Lago, who's the president of COP30.
Se puder apagar a luz aqui de cima.
Hello, I'm André Correia do Lago. I'm the president designate of COP30.
Presidente designado da COP30. Eu gostaria de dizer
that are together in Manaus for this conference organized by the Brazilian Science Academy. And lots of friends are there. I would love to be there with you and to learn even more than I already learned from some of you. But I'm in Brasilia, and I wanted to say hello and say how important it is to stress the scientific dimension even more physically in the Amazon. Climate change discussion started thanks to science, and solutions have to come through a scientific approach. So that's why the Brazilian position at this COP, my position as president, and President Lula's position is absolutely focusing on science. So I thank you very much for working so hard in this context in which the most basic things are being questioned. And as I don't know who said, but very wisely, to say a lie is very easy. To prove that a lie is a lie, it can be very complex. And we rely on you, and I thank you in advance, and I hope everything will go great in that meeting.
Okay, so we have one thematic session tonight, and I now invite Professor Glaucio Oliva, who's a member of the board of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences. He will be chairing the session on Rethinking Tomorrow, Can We Truly Build a Sustainable Climate Future?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Glaucio Oliva. I'm a professor of structural biology and drug discovery at the University of São Paulo and vice president of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences for the São Paulo region. It's my honor and privilege to chair this thematic session entitled Rethinking Tomorrow. Can we truly build a sustainable climate future? As part of this remarkable initiative bringing together science academies from around the world in a united call for climate action ahead of COP30. Our presence here today reflects a shared conviction that science must not only illuminate the path forward, but also help societies make the courageous choices needed to change course. The question before us is both urgent and hopeful. Can we truly build a sustainable climate future? Invites us to look beyond technological fixes and consider the deeper transformations required in our economies, in how we value ecosystems, and in the ways we educate and empower future generations. Today's discussions brings together leading voices who will challenge us to rethink assumptions, inspire integrated solutions, and reaffirm that a sustainable tomorrow is not a distant dream, but a responsibility we must embrace now. So, without further ado, I invite the first speaker of this session. We have an hour and a half, more or less, so I suggest 20, 25 minutes presentations maximum, so we can have some discussions at the end all together, right? So keep your questions, write them down, and we will have a discussion with all the panelists here at the end. So as I said, without further ado, let me first invite the first speaker of this session, Professor Paulo Artacho. Paulo Artacho graduated in physics in 1977, received a master's degree in nuclear physics in 1980, and a PhD in atmospheric physics from the University of São Paulo. He's a full professor at the Institute of Physics at USP and works with physics applied to environmental problems, focusing primarily on global climate change, the Amazon environment, atmospheric aerosol physics, urban air pollution, and other topics. He's a full member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, the World Academy of Sciences, WASS, and the São Paulo State Academy of Sciences as well. And of course, he's a member of IPCC. So looking forward to see your talk. Thank you, Paulo.
Acho que eu vou ficar aqui, né? Acho que eu vou segurar o microfone. Can you have the presentation, please? Okay, so it's a very difficult task we have in these 3 days to find the best way for a sustainable future. So I'll give you some hints on how that can be done. So, yeah, at IMPA, this advancement of slides never works. Pode avançar o slide? Okay, I think we have to integrate the understanding of climate change with all the others very different challenges that humanity are having right now. So we cannot separate climate change from all the others. That includes the biodiversity loss, that includes artificial intelligence threats to us, the lack of democracy in a very recent movement, the health issue and the pandemic issues, the lack of happiness, lack of peace, all over. And the main question is, how could science help humanity? So I hope in the next 2 days we can partially answer this question. So basically, it's 2 weeks ago, a new report on the tipping points from the planet was released. And then basically recently we learned that from the 90 main indicators that treat humanity, we have already surpassed the safe operating limits for 6 different limits in our planet. That is climate change, biodiversity loss, land use change, freshwater change, biogeochemical cycle, as well as novel chemical entities. So basically, this is a warning signal to humanity that possibly we are not going in a very, very good direction for the survival of ourselves and the planet itself. Another important indicator is the World Economic Forum, the Global Risks, that points out that from the 10 main risks for the economy of the planet, 6 of them are associated with environmental and climate issues. And this is how the different drivers could make it difficult for the people who make a lot of money that met every year at Davos could continue to make money as they have done over the last decade. And you see that climate change, the biodiversity loss, the increase in climate extremes are on the top of the list for the difficulties we have for our economy. And the reason for that is exactly this single plot that shows that the global emissions of greenhouse gases are continuing to increase. Besides, we have 29 COPs so far on science since the Stockholm conference in 1972, 50 years ago, warned the society, the general humanity that, we have a problem, we have to correct this trajectory. So now is more and more clear we're emitting 57 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions every year into our atmosphere. So these emissions makes the concentration of critical greenhouse gases like CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, of which we all depend for our survival, to be increased significantly. In terms of CO2, 152% increase in the concentration in the atmosphere, methane 266%. So basically, we are changing the composition of the atmosphere. So that is the basic issue we are behind our discussion here. And from these from the main greenhouse gases, CO2 is responsible for 66% of the excess radiative force we have in our planet. Methane is responsible for 16% of the increase in the radiative forcing. And most important of all is that actually, if we look in the decade increase since the 60s, basically, annual increase in 1996 was about 0.8 parts per million. The last decade is 3.5 ppm. What this means? This means that we are observing acceleration of climate change. And the issue is, how to stop that? What action science, humanity, and governance needs to get this issue? So the UNEP GAP report, released a few months ago, shows that you are heading to a warming of 2.6 to 2.9 degrees Celsius, and this was before Trump have decided to cut down all protection for emission of greenhouse gases, so probably the real number is a little bit higher than that. And last week, the carbon tracker system have released where do you stand for our future climate. You see that if you get all the policies that are in place, we are heading to 2.7 degrees, very similar than the previous ones. And if you do all the possible efforts, even then, we can go to 2.1 increase in temperature. So this means that the Paris Agreement is dead, so this means that we should not stick to the Paris Agreement. That's a discussion we'll have in the end of this talk. So what it means, an increase in temperature of 3 degrees. So basically, Brazil, with an average 3 degrees, because the world is 75% ocean and water has a gigantic heat capacity, the continents heats up much more than the ocean. And in Brazil, this means an increase in temperature in between 4 to 4.5 degrees. In the Arctic and the Canadian boreal forest, is about 5.5 to 6 degrees. So this is a huge increase in temperature for any ecosystems that we have a tremendous impact, not just in our ecosystem, but in all living parts of our planet. But climate is not just temperature, and one of the most important impacts in our society is our capacity to produce food. And one of the main indicators is actually how much soil humidity we will have in a 3 degrees warmed planet. So look for the situation of Brazil, where the central part of Brazil will be much drier than it was a few decades ago. We are already observing that. The same with South Africa.
The same with the Mediterranean Europe and Central America and central part of the United States. So this means to produce food for 10 billion people in 2050 will be a very, very difficult task. This will bring a lot of geopolitical tensions in our planet. So in terms of climate extremes, because the most visible aspect of climate change is the climate extreme, big droughts, big floods. So IPCC mentioned that one event that was happening once every 50 years, if we heat up the planet at 4 degrees, this event will be 39 times more frequent and will be 5 times more intense. So this means it's better we prepare humanity, cities, and the economy to the increase of climate extremes. So just yesterday, this report was released, the Global Tipping Points report, that calculates how far we are from critical tipping points in the climate system. That includes coral deaths, that includes the Atlantic Meridional overturning circulation, as well as the Amazon rainforest. So basically, the report makes it very clear that the threshold to destroy all coral reef is already passed over, so they will not have a chance of survival into the next decades. And we are starting to see changes in the Atlantic Meridional circulation, as well as the possibility of Amazonia to become a carbon source. So basically, these tipping points are extremely important because they could mean irreversible change to our climate system. And then we always have to remember that there is not only physical tipping points, there are social tipping points. And the IPCC Working Group 2 estimates that up to 3.3 billion people will be displaced by 2050 because of climate change. So this will bring incredible amount of geopolitical tensions in all regions, as well as internally in every country. In Brazil, for instance, northeast part of Brazil, that was a semi-arid region, will become an arid region. So we have to decide where we're going to put millions of Brazilians who now lives in a region that in a few decades will be absolutely impossible to survive. So, and then Amazonia is a very special case because Amazonia, with the deforestation emissions, feeds up to, global climate change. Tropical deforestation now is, for all forests, is responsible for about 11% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. So fossil fuel is 90%. So, but climate change is making an important impact in the health of all tropical forests, in particular Amazonia. And the issue with that is that Amazonia alone have 120 billion tons of carbon stored in the ecosystem, that if this carbon goes up to the atmosphere, this is equivalent of about 10 years of all fossil fuel that's burned today. That makes that scenarios from IPCC really a thing of the past. So this is something we should avoid at all costs. And then several papers led by Brazilians recently calculate would be the critical transition in the Amazon forest system. And the critical transition means that there is a 50% chance that in the next 2 decades, most of the Amazon region could cross a tipping point where the ecosystem could not survive as it is right now. So this is a clear message that you have to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, otherwise the Amazon could have no future in terms of survival, in terms of ecosystem. And then, and then it's important that we look into the climate change from a very broad perspective, not just from mitigation, reducing emissions. So we needed to have a pretty complete view, otherwise one of the components could impact negatively on the others. What this means, we have to simultaneously taking care of all climate change drivers, all the effects that you are already observing in all the ecosystem and in the oceans. We have to take care of mitigation, including sustainable agriculture, afforestation, energy systems, and so on. And at the same time, we have to work on climate adaptation, because the climate has already changed and will continue to change in a very fast way. So it's not a very easy task to put on the same basket, you know, the strategies to do with these four different aspects of climate change. So, just going to the final points, what about COP30? What COP30 have to do with all these things? So basically, I personally think that COP30 needs to deal with the 5 main points. The very first one is that we should carry out a fair and rapid transition from fossil fuel to sustainable energy. Without this point, forget all the other points. Second, we have to eliminate tropical deforestation by 2030. These 2 points are associated with the main sources of the greenhouse gases. But at the same time, we needed to implement climate financial mechanisms for developing countries, where Minister Haddad, Tropical Forest for Forever, is a very, very good initiative for preserving tropical forest, but as well as the $1.3 trillion fund that is being negotiated. It's not fair to expect that poor countries like Ghana, like countries in Latin America, spend their resources instead of fighting health or food for their population to invest in energy transition, while the developed countries just go around with their emissions. The fourth point is to implement adaptation policies for the new climate. Without adaptation strategy, including Amazonia, we will be in very bad shape. And finally, to emphasize multilateralism, because without working together, 196 countries that are signatory of the Climate Convention, we have no way out. So basically, only working together is that we can do something like that. We saw in the BRICS communiques, in the BRICS meeting in Rio de Janeiro, there was very important statement that they will work together on this agenda. And that's a nice new thing, because the BRICS includes China, Brazil, Russia, and India, is about 60% of the global emissions. It's not negligible, and it's a very important initiative. So, whoops. Yeah, so basically, a group, yeah, sorry for that, I'm mistaking the PowerPoint. Ambassador André Corrêa do Lago set up a small science committee of about 90 people, 5 from Brazil, 4 from outside Brazil, and we met over the last 3 months to deliver a basic document to Ambassador on how science should be treated in COP30. So the document has about 32 points, I will just emphasize a few of them. First, the essential principles of the Paris Agreement must guide the effort to strengthen the global response to climate change. Without Paris, because we are already above 1.5 degrees. The point is, does it make sense to still insist in the Paris Agreement? And the answer is yes. Why? Because without the Paris Agreement, the increase in temperature, instead of expected 2.6, 2.7 degrees, would be 4 degrees. So it's helping a lot in terms of reduction, and we needed to emphasize the importance of the Paris Agreement. Limiting the global temperature increase in 2.5 above pre-industrial levels is absolutely essential for a safe and livable planet. We must reduce emissions strongly after a period of overshoot. What is overshoot? We will not be able to limit it to 1.5. Overshoot is you go above 1.5 and capture CO2 from the atmosphere and returns to 1.5 degrees if that is possible. That is the tricky word, but we can discuss that later. So basically, continual reliance on fossil fuel is likely to push the world faster and longer, increasing the overshoot beyond 1.5, and then it's essential to ensure that transition away from fossil fuel is carried out in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. The curious thing is that in the pre-COP last week, we had in Brasilia, none of the 25 present countries even mentioned fossil fuel again. This is something we have to worry about. Okay. More than that, achieving global net zero CO2 greenhouse emissions requires system transformation in all countries. It's not just reducing emissions. If you don't transform completely the economy and social aspects, there is no chance we can limit the temperature in 1.5 degrees. And also reducing non-CO2 emissions that are not formally part of the Paris Agreement. Beyond 1.5 degrees, the risk of crossing tipping points increases and the impacts could be catastrophic. And the document mentioned, this cannot be oversized. So we have to call the attention of the society more on the issue of the tipping points. And it's imperative to continue to develop all forms of carbon dioxide removal. We have to remove CO2 have already emitted. But, and the but is very important, recognizing that some of the CDR techniques may turn out to be far too expensive, fail to scaling up to this necessary scale, or create unacceptable impact on ecosystem and communities. So, CDR, removing CO2 is not a magic solution like the oil companies want us to think about that, but it could be an important strategy. And in recent decades, basically, more than 50% of the CO2 we have emitted have been removed or sequestered by the natural sinks. So there is a recommendation that protecting the critical sinks is of paramount importance in any discussion on CO2 removals. That includes forests and that includes the oceans. So this is we have to preserve the sinks for CO2 gases. And reducing greenhouse gas emission and jointly tackling air pollution in the big cities can be a win-win situation. So basically, reducing air pollutants such as ozone, black carbon, and methane will quickly reduce warming and at the same time save millions of lives. This is a very important point. Methane has a lifetime of 11 years. CO2 in the atmosphere have a lifetime of a few centuries to 1 millennia. So removing methane has a much, much faster impact on the greenhouse gases, and that's a recommendation because this will also improve air pollution, and this will also save lives. Adaptation, including loss and damage, is a using priority as climate change treats all country, communities, and people around the world. So adaptation needs to be implemented as quickly and as intensively as possible. Ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solution could be central to adaptation, supporting climate resilience, biodiversity, and sustainable livelihoods in vulnerable regions. So nature-based solutions should be enhanced in terms of applications. And there is a need for structural transformation and effective participation of indigenous people and local communities. It's essential to acknowledge that numerous ways in which the knowledge and practice of indigenous people can and actually contribute to socio-environmental resilience in the face of climate change. So we have to find ways to integrate this knowledge in our way of doing science, especially for climate change. And climate financing at a scale that meets, my time is over, so just finishing. Climate finance at a scale that meets needs can boost confidence for all parties, keeping open the path to a moderate rather than a high temperature overshoot. So, and then finally, improving multilateral cooperation to tackle the climate crisis is a must. So this has been emphasized many, many times by Ambassador Correa do Lago. So finally, yesterday, we published a note on O Globo newspaper, together with Thelma Krug, on COP30 should not lose their focus. And which is the focus? The focus is that only with the progressive elimination of fossil fuels will be possible to guarantee the sustainable future. What we see in all debates from COP30, you know, because people think that COP30 will solve all our problems. So let's make it very clear. COP30 will not solve the issues of the quilombolas in the Marajó region. COP30 will not solve the problems with the protection of the Amazon indigenous people. COP30 will also not solve the issue of the mercury poisoning in the Amazon. COP30 will not stop criminality in Amazonia, will not stop deforestation. Who have to do that is an obligation of our country. It's an obligation of Brazil. It's not a task of COP30. We saw in a lot of debates, people asking, thinking that COP30 will solve issues that actually the Brazil government have to solve internally, not COP30. And that's an important message. So basically the pathway to find the way to build up a new society is already done. Brazil and many other countries are signatories of 17 Sustainable Development Goals, where the SDG 13 is protection of climate, but without a stable climate. None of the other 17 SDGs could be achieved. So climate change and COP30 is very central to our future. So, and basically, science, I think, is very clear to all of us, is critically important to avoid a collapse of the global climate system. In addition to that, Brazil, due to its tropical location, is one of the countries that will be most affected. 4 degrees of increase in temperature in Cuiabá or Palmas has a much higher impact than 4 degrees increase in temperature in Stockholm, Moscow, or Montreal. So we are actually much more treated by climate change than most of the developing countries. And the only way to build up an economic system that could be sustainable is is actually an economic system with social inequality that will be able to build a new sustainable world. So, thanks for the attention, and we'll be able to discuss that later on.
Thank you, Paulo, for an inspiring and, in many ways, very, very illustrative presentation. So now, it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Mariana Schmink, who is Professor Emerita and Distinguished Teaching Scholar at the University of Florida, where she served in the Center for Latin American Studies and the Department of Anthropology. She holds a BA in Anthropology from the University of Michigan and earned her PhD in Anthropology from the University of Texas at Austin. Professor Schmink is internationally recognized for her pioneering work on tropical conservation and development, with a strong focus on the Brazilian Amazon. Her research in Brazil emphasized community-based resource management, gender and development, and agroforestry systems. Professor Schmink, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. I'm honored to be here at this important meeting with so many people from different countries and different fields of science. We're here in the middle of the Amazon, and I'm going to speak about my own experience as an anthropologist of over 50 years working in the Amazon, and use that as a way to reflect on the possibilities for the future and to highlight the potential for socio-bioeconomies as the foundation for a future thriving economy, climate-friendly economy based on standing forests and flowing rivers to benefit both local communities and the planet as a whole, as Paulo Artacho just showed us. Okay. Higher, okay. Okay, thank you. I will begin with a brief review of what I have learned from the current unsustainable trajectories over the past 50 years that have contributed to bringing the region close to a tipping point of no return. I will then highlight what we are learning from Amazonian communities about long-term coexistence and defense of their diverse territories, and how policy measures for socio-environmental governance have shown the potential for these socio-bioeconomies as an alternative paradigm for a sustainable Amazonian future that is key for the future of the planet as a whole. Whoops. Exactly 50 years ago, as a young scholar, I began research in a study of migration to the Amazon from other regions of Brazil as part of an interdisciplinary team. In 1976, our team visited the region between Marabá and Conceição do Araguaia in the southern Pará. Our focus in this first project was on the massive migration of people into the region on the new highways that the military government was implementing at the time. And over the following decades, I visited this region a dozen more times, trying to make sense of the rapid and surprising changes that took place with the expansion of these frontiers into areas deemed empty of occupants by the government, but which I soon found were inhabited by diverse local peoples. There were generous fiscal incentives provided by the government to corporate investors, which led to rapid expansion of cattle ranches and logging operations. Migrant colonists from other regions of Brazil sold everything they owned to venture into unclaimed land, hoping for a secure future for their families. And new towns sprang up overnight along the new highways, based on colonization settlements, ranching, logging, and mining booms that I witnessed over the next 4 decades. The focus of our work shifted to understanding the conflicts that were emerging, characterized by illegality and violence between corporate investors, migrant farmers, and indigenous and local people over access to land, timber, and minerals. Deforestation mushroomed in forested areas as a means to secure access to land, fueling land speculation. And criminal activity in the region has now become widespread and highly organized. Small-scale gold mining became a boom during the 70s and evolved rapidly from the small encampments I visited with the evolution of semi-mechanized systems penetrating indigenous territories and devastating huge areas in the region. And this is a recent photograph from Madre de Dios in Peru. Our study in the 1970s and 1980s focused on São Félix do Xingu, a small riverine town that was the end of a highway under construction for nearly 10 years. I watched the town balloon from less than 3,000 inhabitants to over 50,000 by 2012 when I took this photo, and it's now over 150,000 by 2025. As the town grew along the road, the population literally turned its back on the beautiful Xingu River, now contaminated by mercury from mining. Truly the end of the road, São Félix do Xingu was the port of entry to lands rich in resources along the Xingu and Iriri rivers, leading to massive deforestation and expansion of cattle that earned the municipality the title of cattle capital, with one of the largest herds of cattle in Brazil. What I witnessed appeared to be the massive influx of unstoppable, powerful outside forces, sweeping away all that had been there before. But alongside this massive invasion, there was another story: the resistance by local peoples and the defense of their territories. As you can see from the cover of the books we wrote about this, we focused on the conflicts over resources and how they transformed those regions. We also had a photo on the cover of the book of a Kayapo warrior on the wing of an airplane. That's because in the 1980s, in the midst of this massive frontier expansion in southern Pará, the Kayapo organized resistance enabled them to expand the area of their demarcated territory. Resistance by local populations was common, even during the military dictatorship. Independent miners invaded gold mining areas overnight, including the massive Serra Pelada, which became a populous militarized mine as the miners resisted takeover by the government and by mining companies, and the construction of the Tucuruí Dam and others also led to organized resistance movements. In the 1980s, resistance movements arose all over the region after Brazil's transition to democracy. In the 1990s, rubber tapper leader Chico Mendes, who was part of a community of traditional peoples living from extracting forest products, was awarded several international environmental prizes for his efforts to halt deforestation in the western Amazonian state of Acre. I was privileged to know and work with Chico before he was murdered in December of 1988. By this time, my work in the Amazon had shifted to research and capacity building efforts in Acre to support the new policies the rubber tappers were promoting, including the establishment of extractive reserves, which became an international model for sustainable use categories in other countries, and also that the state's forest government implemented in the 2000s. With the first government of President Lula in 2003, new policies were implemented in the Amazon to halt and break deforestation and to promote more sustainable development. Lula had a strong tie with Acre, and specifically with Chico Mendes, with whom he was arrested for labor organizing during the military government. He appointed Acre's Marina Silva, a former rubber tapper herself, as the Environment and Climate Change Minister. And she is once again in that position in his current presidency. And a series of new and very different policies were implemented. A mosaic of protected areas was created in the Terra do Meio Xingu River area where I had worked. There was a moratorium on purchase of soybeans from deforested areas. There were embargoes on credit and meat purchases from packing plants sourced from deforested areas, and São Félix do Xingu was one of the target municipalities for this effort. And all these led to a drastic reduction in annual deforestation in the Amazon from 2004 to 2016, although later it went back up. Since then, many changes have taken place, but today, indigenous, Afro-descendant, and local peoples are more visible than ever on the front lines of the struggle against deforestation and in favor of sustainable Amazonian futures. We are learning from these long-term Amazonian inhabitants about a different paradigm of development for the region, based on diverse local socio-bioeconomies that support their livelihoods and their territories. I want to make the case that the current continuing emphasis on subsidies and support for destructive commodity and extractive activities that threaten the sustainability of the Amazon as a socio-ecological system must be replaced by support for these socio-bioeconomies. Socio-bioeconomies are the focus of a chapter for which I've been serving as a co-lead author in the 2025 Amazon Assessment Report that is now being finalized by the Science Panel for the Amazon. The Science Panel is a UN organization that brings together over 300 scientists, several of whom are here today. And it will be released for the COP30 climate meeting in Belém next month. The chapter also includes 6 brief calls to action that focus on urgently needed measures to support socio-bioeconomies with specific measures and examples of promising initiatives already underway to promote innovation and develop fair value chains for Amazonian products. Amazonian indigenous, Afro-descendant, and local communities are highly diverse, but through their varied interactions with the biodiversity in their territories, they forge holistic and reciprocal relationships with the common goods that sustain their well-being. Growing evidence from the Amazon shows that indigenous groups occupied the basin for over 12,000 years, covering large areas through trade and alliances and linkages among city centers. Scientists have found thousands of these large-scale geometric earthworks called geoglyphs, like the ones I saw myself in the western state of Acre, hidden under the forests until those forests were cut down. These sites are associated with over 50 domesticated tree species that indicate a long history of successful forest management to support large populations. And by coincidence, there is an exhibit of photographs of these geoglyphs that just opened in the Museu da Amazônia here in Manaus. So maybe on Wednesday after the conference, we can take a trip and go look at that. The indigenous critique of development lays bare the the false separation between people and nature and highlights the imperative to care for both people and nature as part of, quote, good living that recognizes the intrinsic interconnectedness of natural and human systems. This holistic understanding resonates well with the systems perspective of ecologists, who also focus on complex interconnections in natural systems. Anyone who has listened to indigenous people and other local native peoples should be struck by their powerful, value-focused, integrated views of nature and people, based on principles of caring, as expressed in the concept of buen vivir in Spanish, which is codified in the constitutions of 4 countries in South America. Those voices and those values are needed in the dialogue with scientists. Despite their diversity, these communities share an understanding of practices that enhance socio-biological conditions specific to each aspect of a territory, including the processes that support the territory's complexity. These understandings often are expressed in detailed calendars and management instruments. Yet relatively few investments have focused on improving strategies for these diverse multifunctional production systems, especially compared to the massive investments made in specific market commodities. This threatens people's ability to support their communities and has led to many, especially younger people, working in illegal and unsustainable activities. These communities need to have secure land tenure rights to safeguard their often collective territorial management practices, managing low-scale, high-diversity economies that share common principles to help maintain ecosystem connectivity and health, maintenance of water cycles, and climate regulation. They also are circular systems that are distinguished from monocultural commodity production systems that currently dominate the world economy and that have contributed to the planetary crisis. There's a great potential for scientific and technical advancements interwoven with local knowledge and practices to support and enhance local livelihoods and promote these kinds of economies, scaling up through networks and of production and innovation that link rural and urban sites must take care to safeguard the limits of these socio-bioeconomies and avoid the risks of inequity, resource pressures for overharvesting, and waste generation from expansion of global value chains. These observations point to the importance of scaling socio-bioeconomies in a responsible way to avoid the risks of undermining those principles that have made them so effective and that have been shown to exist in scaling markets for Amazonian products. And there are a growing number of networks to bring together producers who are developing and expanding local and regional initiatives. The Xingu Seed Network in the region of Pará, where I worked, producing seeds. The North Amazon Alliance brings together 17 initiatives in 5 Amazonian countries who are working together. There are also examples of responsible scaling, such as the organization in Brazil called Sanctu, working with smallholder farmers to combine regenerative pasture, ecosystem restoration, and agroforestry. Sanctu has a goal of expanding from 10 to 50,000 producers and restoring and monitoring 5 million hectares. Context-specific solutions rooted in a deep ecosystem understanding are the basis of indigenous knowledge. Even within the Amazon, Ecosystems and human contexts vary drastically, and when scaling, this translates to highly localized strategies based on specific land purposes for restoration, for agroforestry, on specific compositions of population, and understanding the scale to respect thresholds. As I said, relatively few, I'm sorry that there was some formatting problems in the translation from my computer to the computer here. Few practical investments have focused on improving strategies for these kinds of systems. And so there's a growing and important role for new technologies and small-scale local processing plants. There are only about 200 currently in the region to add value to existing and new products. The proposal for the Amazon Institute of Technology is to implement decentralized labs, research and testing facilities across the Pan-Amazon region to support innovation, combining local and scientific knowledge with entrepreneurship. Established value chains typically do not fairly remunerate local producers. For example, the large-scale Brazil nut system provides less than 5% of the $400 million trade in Brazil nuts to local producers themselves. There are other major challenges: the boom-bust dynamics of global markets, the difficulties of distributing risks and rewards, and of quality control, the lack of formal recognition of rights and intellectual property, the threat of over-harvesting, and the need for value chains to include multiple products, not just one commodity. Niche markets, such as so-called controlled origin destinations, can sometimes provide price premiums that recognize the local cultural heritage and resources. Geographic indication statuses are held by the Sateré-Maué indigenous people in Brazil for wild guaraná, and by the Arajun and Wampia communities in Peru for a native cacao lineage that they domesticated. And there is this network called Origins Brazil, which supports traceability, good governance, fair pricing, and monitoring of such efforts. And there are a growing number of collaborative efforts to support links between Amazonian socio-bioeconomy producers and businesses and customers, as well as tools and resources to guide these efforts. With the right investments and safeguards, socio-bioeconomies can provide a foundation for a sustainable future based on thriving forests and flowing rivers in the Amazon. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Schmink, for bringing forward the people. We have a lot to learn from your experience, and it makes us really believe, your examples makes us believe that there are ways for a sustainable climate control based on what people already know to do for so many years in this region. Thank you again. So the third speaker of the night will be Dr. Robin Fierce. Robin has a background in biochemistry, nutrition, and medical research with 29 years previous experience in pharmaceutical industry, R&D, and in R&D policy. In the past 2 decades, he has provided advice on biosciences policy issues to a range of public sector organizations, particularly science and medicine academies, parliamentary groups, the European Commission, and industry. A significant part of his later work has focused on climate change impacts on health and equity. Currently, he is a consultant to WHO European region on climate and health strategy. Dr. Fears, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me first, of course, join with the other speakers in thanking the organisers for inviting me here to this, to this splendid setting, exciting event. I'm going to present some work from the Inter-Academy Partnership, IAP, which Helena has already mentioned as a key international framework for academies. And my focus will be on climate change in health. You might wonder, given that, why I've chosen the image on this title slide. What has it got to do with health? I use it to emphasize the point of planetary health, but we can't think about human health without considering the multiple interactions with the environment that I will come on to. So that's what I'm covering. And this is the IAP Global Network. I want to emphasize that it's a network of academies of science, engineering, and medicine. And as we heard earlier, it's important for those disciplines to come together to understand the problems that we face on climate change and to think about solutions. IAP is organized in 4 regional networks in the Americas, in Europe, in Asia, and in Africa. And when IAP developed its strategic priorities a few years ago, the list here was identified as the priorities, and I think each and every one of them is relevant to what we're talking about in terms of academies emphasizing and clarifying the role of science to groups such as COP30 and to raise the visibility of the essential role of science in developing solutions. So that's the strategy of IAP. And over the years, as I'm sure many of you know, IAP has worked on a number of topics relevant to what we're talking about over the next few days. In particular, a statement several years ago on the interconnections between climate change and biodiversity. It has already been mentioned how closely related these topics necessarily are. And I won't go into the detail on those interactions. The report is available, but I do just want to reiterate a point that was made in the welcome speeches, but there are many interactions at the scientific and ecological level between climate and biodiversity, but what we don't yet see is a policy convergence, particularly at the global level in the UN system. Biodiversity and climate change are often still considered to be separate subjects, whereas, of course, there are many policy interconnections. I won't say more about that, but for the rest of my talk, I will turn to the importance of climate change on health and the negative impacts on health. Climate change is not only an environmental crisis, well, of course it is, it's also a health emergency. And the work of WHO and others over the last few years has defined multiple pathways of risk and multiple impacts on health. And they're summarized briefly in this slide. And essentially, the pathways are both direct and indirect, and I'll give you a couple of examples for that. And the impacts at the bottom there, are found across many health systems, the health services themselves, but also the human health systems, for example, cardiovascular, but not just physical health. There are also significant impacts of climate change on mental health. And of course, it's a truism to say that we're all affected by these pathways, but it's also very true to say that vulnerable groups who are already affected most by health inequities are affected most by climate change. So there is an exacerbation of inequity. So let me just give you a couple of examples, show what I'm talking about. This is a direct effect on health. Increasing heat, we already heard, is a significant result of greenhouse gas emissions increasing in the atmosphere. This very recent data is actually looking at heat stress rather than temperature, and essentially heat stress is being exacerbated by climate change around the world, including in South America. So it is affecting us all. An example of an indirect effect of climate change on health is mediated via effects on agriculture, whether that's increased temperature, changing precipitation, changing pathogens and diseases. But the data here show that the projected reductions in food crop productivity, for the most part, this relates to cereal crops, but there are also significant reductions currently occurring and projected for fruit and vegetables yield and nutritional content. So this is a large field of study. The problems are shared worldwide, including, of course, in Brazil. It might seem that some of Northern Europe will avoid the impacts of climate change on food and agriculture. And you think this is yet to be ascertained. It is indeed true that a warming climate increases the number of months in the year that Northern Europe can grow crops, but that is probably going to be offset by changes in precipitation and by changes in pests and diseases that will affect food crops. So it's a complex picture. So turning to IAP, we've been conducting a project over the last few years, a global project supported by the regional academy networks, who each produced their own report on assessing the impacts of climate change on health. And then we put together those contributions to a global report, and have also produced small reports on regions that weren't included amongst those other regions, for example, the Arctic and some of the Mediterranean. And I might just mention that the IANUS report, a very thorough document, and I commend it to you, was led by Jeremy McNeil, who many of you will know and miss his wise contributions to as science goes forward. So this is what IAP did. Obviously, I don't have time to go through the detail. The reports are all published on the IAP website, and indeed, a lot of this material is also published in peer-reviewed journals, which are listed on the IAP website. So for more detail, please look at the IAP material. Just to say that we had wide representation from each of the regions, including the Americas, and additional inputs, not just to the working group, but through peer review and through our regionally based meetings. So a fairly wide coverage of many of the members of IAP. And just very briefly, in terms of what did we find, well, the key messages, some of which you've essentially heard already, is that the problems are here and now. There are significant effects across physical and mental health. the impacts are indeed greatest on those populations least able to cope, including indigenous peoples. The IANAS report did look at some of the published evidence for indigenous peoples in South America and Latin America. And in addition, as I mentioned, we did a report in the Arctic where we looked in some detail at the Inuit Canadian indigenous peoples. So there's quite a lot on indigenous peoples in those reports. The solutions, I emphasize here, including nature-based solutions that we heard about just now, are within reach, using the knowledge that's presently available to us, although of course there are many research gaps to fill. And indeed, if we make rapid decisive action, we can reduce long-term health risks. The impacts cross national boundaries, both in terms of the threats, for example, air pollution or migration, both of which we heard about earlier, but also the solutions can cross national boundaries in terms of sharing the evidence and scaling up mitigation and adaptation. There's a number of issues to consider in terms of trade-offs and costs of policy action. These reports were mostly written during COVID-19, so it was a very significant immediate question as to how climate change interacted with COVID-19, and the reports do discuss that. But of course, currently, climate change impacts are exacerbated by other global challenges, not least the uncertain geopolitical situation. What are the solutions? And again, these derive from the IAP reports and the many other compilations of evidence, for example, from IPCC. We need both adaptation and mitigation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And in terms of the health impacts, we must be aware that a number of the potential mitigation solutions do bring short-term health co-benefits. For example, as we heard, reduced fossil fuel combustion doesn't just reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it reduces air pollution and has significant benefits to health. Reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture will bring mitigation, but it will also bring benefits to human health if the high consumption of meat in those countries where high consumption of meat is found is reduced towards a more plant-based diet. That will have positive effects on non-communicable diseases. And so active transport will reduce fossil fuel combustion for transport and will increase physical activity and physical health. So we need both adaptation and mitigation. With regard to adaptation, let me emphasize it's not just adaptation in the health sector itself, although critically important that is, but adaptation, for example, in urban planning, increasing the amount of green spaces, or in agriculture, increasing climate resilient traits in crops. So we need both. And in terms of the title of this session, Rethinking Tomorrow, there's a number of underlying scientific challenges that still need to be addressed as we progress these solutions. Currently, the geographical distribution of research is very biased towards Western Europe, North America. Much less is known about the threats in the rest of the world, and even less about the solutions to those threats. So we do need to collectively attend to the research bias that currently exists. We need to do more to understand the attribution of impacts to climate risk pathways. We need attribution in order to demonstrate to policymakers that the threat is real, to demonstrate in the courts of law that this is a correctable change. we need to take a transdisciplinary approach to research to remove the silos that we find in many universities where focus is still on single disciplines. We need to move to transdisciplinary approaches. And that's also true, of course, at the policy level. We need to do better in integrating across sectoral policy. There's a couple of other points on that side that I won't go into, but at the moment, and COP30 may well return to the issue of what do we do about loss and damage initiatives. It's a complex issue. All I would say is that any loss and damage work needs to be based on scientific evidence, and that includes the health evidence, and it's not obvious at the moment that that will be so. So this is what the scientific community needs to do in broad terms. One specific example drawn from recent IAP work, together with the global NGO, Save the Children, looked at essentially health adaptation case studies in vulnerable populations, including children, in order to understand what makes a good case study, what makes an effective adaptation intervention, how should the results from case studies be used in policy terms and be available for scaling up to practice elsewhere. So some very practical questions. And IAP over the last couple of years has published both a volume of the individual case studies and a summary for policymakers on the lessons drawn from all of the case studies. One of the case studies was conducted here in Brazil, and I'll spend a minute on that. For all the rest, I'm afraid I must refer you to the published material, but I will come back to the overall conclusions. This was the Brazil case study, which looked at the intersection between heat as climate change with air pollution and socio-economic vulnerability in these city centres across Brazil, including Manaus. Sorry, I apologise if you couldn't see all the detail. I just wanted to give an impression of the research evidence, which actually has also been published in detail previously by Professor Saldiva and his colleagues. But very quickly, what did the case study find? And these lessons are generalizable beyond the specific Brazilian context. Climate change and air pollution intersect. They exacerbate each other, and they do affect children's health. Focus was on children. The effects do depend on a complex mix of demographic and other factors, access to health services, inadequate socio-economic status, and so on. The scientific evidence alone is probably not sufficient to change public policy, and policymakers must also take into context the values and cultures of those affected the local community. And I think it's self-evident that rapid action is needed. More details are in the case studies from IAP. But more generally, conclude what did we learn, or what can the scientific community learn in designing case studies? It's important to take a systems-based approach to research, to integrate across disciplines and across sectors. Health issues are not a matter just for the health sector, but we have to think about urban planning or agriculture or transport or whatever. But a systems-based thinking does provide a framework for using the results and translating those results to policy and practice. A very critical part of all of the case studies, and what was designed into the case studies by IAP, was the importance of co-producing solutions with the end users, with the local community involved. That might seem self-evident. yet many scientific studies on the threats and on solutions have been conducted without consulting the community affected. And that is essential in order both to produce valuable research, but also to ensure that the uptake of the outputs is then possible in the community. And increases the likelihood of avoiding maladaptation, which bedevils a lot of research studies in this area. When thinking about case studies, what should the scientific community do, that there is still a great need to focus on those underserved groups, whether they're indigenous peoples, children, the elderly, the poor, and so on. And IAP is still considering how to use the lessons from this and other research to provide guidance to the research community more generally on how to design adaptation studies. And not just to design the research, but how to ensure that the outputs of that research are taken up by policymakers and by others. And again, come back to the point that climate change does intersect with other health crises and has to be taken into account in multiple SDGs, not just the SDG on climate that we heard about. Of course, at the same time, there's a lot of other work identifying what needs to be done in health in the face of climate change. This is a very recent common position from about 50 organizations in the Latin American and Caribbean region on what needs to happen to tackle climate change in health. The recommendations are direct both to national governments and to the international community. And obviously the detail is in this publication. All I will say now is that I think really all of these recommendations need to be underpinned by robust science. Perhaps not obvious from the bulleted list, but the research community has very important roles and responsibilities in all of those recommendations relating to climate and health. So, coming back to rethinking tomorrow, what do we conclude from this work for IAP and others? Well, we need to do better in using the evidence base that's already available. In our experience, very few governments are using the material that is already available for them. And I guess that's partly a problem of the scientific community rather than the policymakers. So we need to have clearer avenues of transmission of research to the policy community, and action should and can be integrated between countries and sectors. It's not it's not a matter just for the health sector. But in addition to using the evidence that's already available, we do need to fill knowledge gaps through new transdisciplinary research. For example, to understand solutions and how to upscale those solutions, how to replicate them. And we need to understand more about the attribution of effects in order to convince policymakers, in order to convince courts of law, and so on. We do need to do more to focus on vulnerable groups. These are currently underserved in the research portfolio and, of course, in policy terms. We do need to do better in the continuing evaluation of solutions. Once we get to the happy state of implementing potential solutions, we do need to continue monitoring and feed back the evaluation into modification of solutions and their scale up. It is an iterative process. And two final points. health professionals can be champions for climate change, not just champions in the health sector, but champions more widely for climate action. Health professionals are trusted by many in the community, whereas other sources of information may not be trusted. And health professionals do need to reach out from beyond their sectoral interests to cross sectors and explain and assess how solutions in other sectors, whether that's agriculture or urban planning or whatever, do have significant health impacts. And finally, I hope you'll be glad to hear, academies can have multiple significant roles at national, regional and global levels in terms of capacity building, leadership of a scientific community, with regard to research and with regard to innovation for health and for sustainability. So I think that's my last point. So just thank you. All of the things I've said are published in IAP reports or other papers. So please consult them if you would like to know more.
I think you can stay. Can I invite the three speakers for a brief discussion session? We are running late, a little bit late, but I think that we can at least keep 15 minutes for discussion of this very, very exciting panel. I know that we have a dinner waiting for us. And caipirinhas as well. Wow, that's a good motivation for a quick discussion. So please just raise your hand and we'll bring you a microphone for a question. Maybe Fernando will help us with one microphone running around. I couldn't see a hand. All right, yes. Sorry. You already have your microphone there? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for the floor. First, I'm Dr. Sall from National Academy of Science, Senegal, West Africa. Thanks to the three presentators for all information shared. And Professor Artaxo, you ask a very important question. How could science help humanity facing the climate crisis? I would bring some contribution to answer this question. First of all, is the issue of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence can enhance climate modeling, predict extreme weather. You talk about this extreme weather, and optimize renewable energy system. Second point is drones, the drones. Drones equipped with sensors can monitor climate-related disasters and track change in ecosystems. Third point is Earth observation. Earth observation, satellite, remote sensing technology can provide critical data on climate indicators. Last point is advanced computing. Advanced computing, high performance computers enable scientists to simulate complex climate systems. Finally, by combining scientific research technological innovation. And it is why we are here today for these 3 days. Collaborative efforts. We can develop effective solution to combat the climate crisis. It is a very important issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have 3 more hands raised, so we'll take all the questions and then we'll circulate on the table, right? So if you can take notes, I can borrow you a pen. If you need one, Paulo Artaxo, you have a pen. Okay. So, on the back there, please.
Good evening, everyone. I am Professor Raymond Jagassar from the Caribbean Academy of Science, Foreign Secretary. So I'd like to thank the panel for the very excellent presentation. You've been talking about sources of climate change, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. But I feel that one of the major cause, another cause of global warming is wars, putting out a lot of particles in the atmosphere that is destroying the equilibrium of the atmosphere. So we need to control war, we need to stop wars, and I think together with controlling carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and still continuing our investigation of other sources for global warming, I think we can, and also if each country in the world strives to achieve net zero emission of carbon dioxide, I think we're going to solve this climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. There's one question here, and then the last one here, and then we'll come to the table, right?
Virgílio Viana, Fundação Amazônia Sustentável. Marianne, it's great to see you after so many years. I do share the similar view that indigenous-led sustainable development can play a very important role in developing a new pathway for the future of the Amazon. However, we have a very hostile political landscape at the regional level. As you well know, our friends were not elected in many states and in mayors, at the state assemblies. So the scenario is very much anti-indigenous peoples. So what are your thoughts on how to promote indigenous peoples-led sustainable development pathways in a context of a very hostile political environment in the region?
Thank you. And last question here, on my left.
Thank you very much for your presentations, and after listening to you, I can think of several adjectives: alarming, urgent, threatening. So, you already mentioned that we have had 29 COPs before this one. So, and I realize that COP30 has to be different and has to involve serious commitments. So I would like to listen to the opinion of the speakers in what way COP30 could be different.
Okay, so now we have time for answers from the table.
Yeah, very briefly, you know, certainly the advancement of artificial intelligence is a very, very big societal issue that has impact on climate change, you know. But the problem with artificial intelligence is in the hands of very, very, very few people and very few companies. And that really makes the things very dangerous for the whole community, because it will increase the centralization of information that is characterized by the social networks we have today. And this is, in my opinion, extremely dangerous for the society as a whole. You mentioned the issue of adaptation and science. It's very important to know that, you know, adaptation to climate change is a very local issue and will have to be developed locally by science from local communities. It's impossible to make a strategy for adaptation for the whole Brazil with the gigantic difference we have from Rio Grande do Sul, Northeast, or Amazonia. So basically, the science for adaptation will need to be done locally by universities, by research institutes from each locality. And finally, you mentioned another important point, that is climate monitoring. We need much better tools to follow up the changes we are having in the ecosystems, in the ocean, and the social impacts of climate change. Society is not ready yet for a full blow of climate monitoring. We have a network of weather, but climate is much more than just weather, just temperature and precipitation. So basically, that is a very big, important point that we are completely unprepared to deal with. So I will pass by. I will discuss the COP30 issue that you mentioned, that is about the 29 COPs. The problem is that we lack governance. Basically, a single country can block any decision from the 196 other countries. A system like that could never work as it have not worked over the previous 29 COPs. So either we change the governance way we do, because the United Nations is completely powerless right now. We see the role of United States in the two big wars we're having, and the same with the COP30, you know. So we needed to build up a new, completely governance system in order for the COP30 decisions could be implemented properly.
Professor Schmidt.
Thank you, Virgilio, for your difficult and cruel question. These are, and I think that the moment right now is very different than it was even 10 years ago. The indigenous community is well organized. They're going to be very present at the COP. They have articulated very clear demands and needs. I think that's a very positive sign. The scientific community also is now taking these proposals and these examples seriously as part of the way forward. I showed in one of the slides, Embrapa now has a platform focused on indigenous knowledge. In the science panel for the Amazon, I've been really impressed with how much that panel has moved in the direction of endorsing and promoting the ideas of socio-bioeconomies and this integrated way of thinking about how to develop the Amazon. I think that we need to provide the political support for those people who are very organized, who are very visible, and we as scientists need to incorporate that into our own work and our own way of dealing with people in the region. I know that that's something that you yourself have been doing. Beyond that, the political questions are not something I can solve.
Dr. Fierce.
Okay, well, let me select.
Yeah, you can select
a couple of points. Perhaps the first one was a point about artificial intelligence. I mean, AI, I'm sure, will have a lot of potential across many aspects of understanding and responding to climate change. As a tool, it can be used for good or bad. And unfortunately, we've seen some of the early impacts of artificial intelligence on spreading myths and disinformation. It makes it easier to create false narratives in social media and so on. And obviously, I think that's a challenge to the scientific community and others, push back on that myths and disinformation. In the UK, we've just developed guidelines for researchers as to how to start that process. And I think there's more to be done at the regional, global level for the scientific community to get involved. Not just on climate change and health, but there are many aspects of myths and disinformation created by vested interests. And with a commercial involvement. So that's just a caution on AI. With regard to the point about difficult political landscapes for indigenous people, I don't have the knowledge on this region, but for example, one of the case studies that IAP looked at with Save the Children was a study of local community farmers in Thailand, where I think some were indigenous people and some weren't, and the solutions emerged after many years of research. And my point is that we need to do better in sharing those lessons across the world, so that initiatives in a particular region can look to see what worked or didn't work elsewhere. And finally, COP30 has to be different, but how? Well, let me just give you a small analogy that I think it was COP28 in Dubai, for the first time there was a health day. And indeed, many ministers came along and said how important health was. It was rhetorical. I don't think it led to anything. And most importantly, it wasn't linked to a scientific evidence base. So there was no discussion of what you would have to do if you thought health was important. Did we have enough evidence on solutions, threats, and so on? And how would you attribute the impact to the risk? So my point is that this analogy, we need to do better in linking the scientific evidence to whatever we want to do at a COP. That's why I'm so encouraged by the work of the Brazilian Academy to try and do it exactly that. Because to be truthful, I think in many previous COPs, that the local National Academy has not been particularly conspicuous in its work at COP, and that does need to change to raise the visibility of science throughout.
Okay, so I think we reached our time limit. Quarter minute, 15 minutes to 8. Sorry, my clock is still in São Paulo. So I would like a round of applause to thank our panel. And invite you all for a continuous discussion, probably now filled with some drinks. Thank you.